Good Gab, sponsored by Skillskin, a nonprofit organization empowering individuals with disabilities through employment. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's my extreme pleasure to have Bob Lutz here, longtime Spokane resident, a heart for service, and I think we're going to learn a lot today. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Tell us what's happening in your world.
Well, I'm still doing public health. So where I'm finding myself right now, Steve, is I work for the Department of Health, and so still very much involved in, if you will, sort of the, don't want to say the pandemic is winding down, but certainly the intensity of the response is a far cry from what it was 6 months ago or a year ago. So as I said, from that standpoint, that's looking good. And then I'm also, one day a week, I work for Chaz, and I do what's called street medicine.
What's that?
And so street medicine, it is medicine on the street, truly. I don't need to tell you, we all know that there's a homelessness issue here in Spokane. It's not just unique to Spokane, we're seeing it nationwide.
Right.
And a lot of times the individuals who find themselves living unsheltered, houseless, however you want to phrase it, have had negative experiences with the healthcare system, and they have healthcare issues.
Fair.
So the reality is that, if they're not going to come to a healthcare setting, the healthcare setting needs to come to them. And so what we attempt to do, and it's not just me, there's one physician, a physician assistant, a couple of MAs, a nurse, also a work of social workers who go out, and we bring healthcare to them.
When did this initiative start?
Yeah, so Chaz had a lot of foresight in this, Steve, and so probably a little bit more than a year ago, there had been some conversations for a while. A couple years ago, I had the chance of meeting some of the people and players, and then with time and persistence, it came together. And so, as I said, there's another physician, Dr. Luis Manriquez, who works at WSU. There's a great PA named TJ Burns, and we all now work for Chaz. And then again, we've got some great medical assistants who really can connect with people. And these individuals, who find themselves living houseless, unsheltered, what have you, oftentimes have had a lot of trauma and are still existing in a traumatic state. And it's a rapport that you need to establish with them, and I think that's one of the things that I've really been appreciative of. They're more than willing and more than able to open up, but they need to trust. Yeah, no, as you said, Steve, it takes time. And that's where, again, when they see the same people, and the same people they've had a good positive experience with, and or they have friends and contacts who have had those positive experiences, then that trust is there. But
the word gets out, right?
Yeah, but it's a slow process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a slow process, but the need is incredible, and the stories people share with you, again, as I've stated, people don't wake up one day and say, you know what, I want to live on the street.
No, they do not.
I want to live on the street and be looked upon disparagingly by people who drive by and get stuff thrown at me, and people think that I commit crimes, and the data demonstrate that, unfortunately, if you are living homeless, you have a greater likelihood of having crime committed against you,
right,
than you committing crime. But that's not the narrative.
No, that's not what everyone's hearing.
No, and so that's unfortunate. But again, I think that the more people who hear the stories, and the stories are really heartfelt. I mean, again, it's you go home at the end of the day, and there but by the grace of God go all of we, and truly, for many of our members in the community, they're one paycheck away from potentially losing the roof over their heads, and then what happens? And as we know, we don't have enough housing.
Right.
We don't have, housing, be it homes, be it apartments, be it what have you, to house the number of people who are out there. And so again, it's a challenging situation. So that's one portion of my life, which again, I think It's public health. It is public health. It's public health on the ground.
Yeah, I'd say that's like guerrilla public health.
Well, yeah,
You're
I
on the
mean,
street.
Yeah, but it's, as I said, I think it's just it gives me a lot of meaning, but it also, as I said, makes much of sort of the existential nature of public health, which is oftentimes, public health is there for the public's health, and it is behind the scenes. I think people prior to the pandemic equated it with care for the underserved.
Sure.
And vaccinations and regulations. So, you would not be able to go to a restaurant and feel comfortable knowing that this restaurant had never been inspected. And that's the kind of stuff that public health does. Now, public health is seen for its great work during the pandemic. For me, the work on the street is truly grounding public health in the reality of the public's health, because I can read about it, I can talk about it, but it's the lived experience
Right.
of talking with people who are there, who are dealing with public health issues, that for me grounds my sort of theoretical, at times sort of distant work in public health. So,
Where did this drive come from in you? That you wanted to be a part of this world? Just medicine's huge, right? There's a wide breadth that you could go.
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. I mean, it's interesting. I can look back, and my mother was a nurse, and she said, "Bobby, you're going to be a doctor." I said, "I'm going to be a doctor?" And I grew up wanting to be a doctor. And then I got to medical school, and it's like, cool, do I really want to be a doctor? And
Yeah, what was that experience like?
talk about existential angst. I've now spent, 4 years of college and doing everything directed towards being a physician. And what I found was that the interactions with human beings again, it's priceless. I mean, there is a reality of being a physician or nurse practitioner, physician assistant that nobody else can experience, because there's very few roles or very few vocations where somebody is willing to share her or his life's experiences with you, in times of being very vulnerable. And so for me, that's an honor to be able to actually spend time and share time and space with someone, and then to have a skill that can provide service.
And help. True
Right.
help.
Yeah, but what I also found, though, was that for me, I wanted to, medicine is like, I'm lousy at construction, but here's a metaphor for you. It's like building a house one brick at a time. And so every person is that brick, and you are, again, you're positioning that brick. This is a bad metaphor, but go with it.
I'm ready.
Okay, good. Just let me run with this. Public health is like putting up sheetrock. And so you are building a structure by creating this framework so that everybody can be healthy. And so rather than one person at a time, public health is trying to create healthy environments. And so for me, when I found, it was interesting, I was doing a fellowship in what's called integrative medicine, which is essentially learning about alternative care practices, so Chinese medicine and nutrition and energy medicine and all this kind of, foo-foo stuff in medicine. I mean, we were like, what is this stuff? But the reality is that Western medicine is a very aggressive form of medicine. I mean, we either cut it out or we blast it with drugs. And yet you look at, cultures that have looked at health in a very different framework. And there's a lot of merit to that. And so for us to think in a very hubristic way, if there's such a word, that we have all the answers by Western medicine, I think is truly an ignorant approach. So to be able to partner, and I truly say partner with an individual, Because again, in medicine, we treat patients. But one of the things that I came to learn in my practice of integrative medicine was that you're partnering with somebody. It's a journey. And you've been given an opportunity to maybe assist somebody and or to guide that person on a journey. And as a physician, I mean, it's an incredible honor to be given that opportunity and to then further your toolbox with different tools, not just, here's a pill, we need to take you to surgery. Oh, wait a minute. There's things I can be doing for myself. I could meditate, or maybe I could eat differently. That's kind of cool. So anyway, it was during a fellowship in integrative medicine that I learned about public health, and all of a sudden the light went off. It's like, oh, this is totally cool. It's population approach to health.
Yeah.
And
what part of the world were you in when you were going through, this integrated medicine, study?
Yeah, so University of Arizona.
Okay.
At that time, Andrew Weil. So Andrew Weil, back in the 80s and 90s, well-known author, physician. Some called him a guru of alternative medicine, and I was selected to be I was the second class of fellows, which was totally cool. I mean, it was
very
a true
cool
honor, but it was interesting how I got there. I was in family practice, and wow, I've just worked another shift, and I'm like, my days are really long and my nights are really short because I'm having to get up and do call and all this kind of stuff. And I'm flipping through my journals and I'm seeing this integrative medicine. What is this?
Yeah, who is this person?
Yeah. But what was cool was that I had experienced some of the integrative medicine on my own, in that I had a running injury years and years ago. And after I did this marathon, I came up lame. And it was like, what should I do? And went the traditional route of physical therapy and orthopedics, and I got nothing. And I found a massage therapist. And Wes worked wonders, but then one day he goes, Bob, I'm studying acupuncture. Would you mind if I stick needles in you? And I'm like thinking, okay, fine, stick needles in me, see if it makes a difference. Go ahead. So he massages me, and then all of a sudden he sticks needles in me, and wow, I could run. And I mean, it made no sense, because if you look at the meridians in Eastern medicine, and you touch here and it affects someplace else in your body, and it's like, how does this make sense from the anatomy that I understand and have been taught? It doesn't. But something happens.
Right. And you see an outcome, it's hard to look away, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I experienced this, and then all of a sudden to be brought into or given an opportunity of actually learning about it, totally cool. So as I said, I was fortunate enough to be, chosen as one of the 4 second class of fellows, and learned a lot. And again, for me, that the value of that was learning how to work with individuals in a different way, that I had more tools. And again, I think that, as I shared earlier, it's a path, it's a journey. And when someone has an illness, who they journey with and how they experience that journey will affect that outcome. And they may want to get here, and they may not know how they're going to get there, but at least you're able to assist them in that. And so for me, that was a real honor. So there I am studying integrative medicine, totally cool. And then I learn about public health, and I say, even cooler.
You're like, all right, I'm in.
This is great. And so I went and got my master's in public health at University of Arizona, and then found myself up in Spokane. And I think one of the things I would share with the listeners is that, for me, the definition of public health, one that I present, is that it came out from the Institute of Medicine back in 1988. Public health is what we as a society do collectively to assure the conditions in which people can be healthy.
The framework.
And when I provide that definition, I say, for me, there are 3 important elements of that. It's a collective effort. Okay, it's a collective approach. We in public health are not solely responsible for the public's health. We are a contributor. And it's a collective effort. And it's a societal responsibility. The reality is, health is not a gift. health is a responsibility that I think we in society need to provide to people. Health is an asset, and we need to be able to provide the conditions for people to achieve that asset. And so it's the conditions, it's all the social context, physical context that allows people to have health. And so I rhetorically ask people, you may not be a public health person, but do you care about the person you're sitting next to? Do you care about somebody else? Do you care about your neighbors? If you do, then I would argue you're probably a public health person.
Yeah, you are part of this.
Yeah, and it's a collective effort. And so that's where, again, I think that the pandemic has certainly highlighted public health in both good and bad ways. And it'll be interesting to see as the pandemic sort of becomes endemic, whatever that means. I mean, again, people need to realize that endemic diseases still cause a lot of bad things. But as the pandemic winds down, what is public health going to look like in the future? And will it find itself stressed and or at times vilified when public health is called upon again to weigh in heavily for the next pandemic or whatever we find ourselves having to deal with? And I think that, for us to say, oh, the pandemic only happens every 100 years,
silly, right?
It's with climate change and, more and more viruses and things are changing and all that, we in public health certainly believe that we are going to see another significant epidemic, possibly pandemic, in, the near future, define near. And I just hope that at the end of the day, we've learned our lessons, and that although obviously, those of us in public health needed to learn a lot of lessons as well. I mean, this was a novel virus. We didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, all
We've
new.
learned, and we made mistakes.
Yeah, how human.
Own up to it. We made mistakes. But at the end of the day, I think we save lives. And I know we save lives. And so I hope that people recognize that, and that when the next pandemic comes, it's looked upon, or public health professionals are looked upon as just that, health professionals for the public that are there to do good work and not be vilified for doing the work that they've done.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I think anyone who wants to be in support of public health has to understand it's like we're humans. We are working hard. We're using science to try to solve problems, and some of them are quite complex. Yeah. But it's not just viruses and things of that nature either. It's we're watching really inexpensive drugs hit our streets right now, like the fentanyl crisis. I mean, in my mind, that is a public health crisis, right? Yeah, it's affecting many people and communities, and it might not just be the individual down the street and their family, but it's their friends. It's just affecting everybody. Yeah, no, you're right on, Steve. I mean, again, it's interesting for me, just the progression back in 2017, 2018, when fentanyl was just starting to make itself present in our community, people were avoiding it. We were talking about what are called fentanyl test strips. So you could test the drug that you were using to see if it had fentanyl in it. And now fentanyl test strips, they can still be utilized, but the reality is that fentanyl is everywhere. Right. And back then, trying to avoid fentanyl, now trying to find fentanyl. And it's dirt cheap. The market got flooded a year plus ago, as we've heard. And so now it's just everywhere. And, not only is it in the drugs that you don't think have fentanyl, but it's in the drugs that are fentanyl, and people are using it. But I think, we use the term behavioral health to look at both substance usage and mental health issues. Okay. That's sort of an umbrella phrase. And I think people need, we have had historically, this dichotomy between the mind and the body, and mental health and physical health. We separated it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it goes way back, and again, I won't bore you with that history, but there has been this duality, this dichotomy between, okay, you've got a physical health condition, and you're going to go to a doctor, and you know what? we define people. Unfortunately, I know people who define themselves by their medical conditions.
Sure.
You know, I've got heart disease. I'm a diabetic. Nobody talks about themselves being a depressive, or I'm anxious, or I've got schizophrenia. You know, and we in our communities tend to like keep these people at a distance.
Yeah, it starts
now,
to get
obviously,
scary.
now, obviously, things like the Prozac generation. I mean, I remember when Prozac first came out, and it's like all of a sudden everybody wants Prozac. And I remember being in a cafe, and I had 3 people across the aisle talking about the different doses of Prozac they were taking, and they were like really excited about it. I'm like thinking, what does this say about our society when people are excited about taking an antidepressant? So
Well, because it fixes things, we know, right?
It may. It may. It may.
I say that facetiously.
Yeah, right. It may. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it may. I mean, there have been certainly many people who have found their lives bettered by taking the right medication. And I think that's right on.
Sure.
Where I'm going with this is that we have, as a society, a challenge with individuals who have mental health issues. They're treated differently.
We see it every day in our work at
Yeah,
Skillskin,
right.
you know, helping people with disabilities.
Yeah, they're treated differently. And as a result, they don't always get the same compassion that is given someone with a physical illness. And so, again, I think right now, substance usage, yeah, it's out there. I mean, you're reading about it. 104,000 plus deaths attributed to overdoses last year, give or take, and locally as well as statewide, an issue. But look at the mental health issues that existed prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic has made worse.
Yeah, definitely exasperated.
And so we are going to have individuals who are going to have mental health issues exacerbated by the pandemic that are going to be ongoing. And we know locally as well as nationally, we do not have enough mental health professionals to address the need. What do we do? And, you know, many people will find themselves self-medicating. People take drugs because they like the way it makes them feel. They don't like the way they feel.
Right.
So I'll take a drug. You know, what are the numbers? Something like, I want to say, 10%, maybe more, of people who use methamphetamine are using it to self-medicate. And opioids are no different. And because they're so addictive, well, you take it because I don't like the way I feel. And, I saw a woman doing street medicine a couple of days ago, and she was hospitalized. And the doctors, because she was using fentanyl, gave her methadone as a pain medication in the hospital. But then she's discharged.
Yeah.
And where do you get methadone? You have to go to either the methadone program at the health department, or if you have insurance, there's another methadone program. But there's a long queue to get into the methadone program. And so what's she going to do? She's going to end up using again.
Absolutely.
And so we find ourselves in a really tough place. But getting back to your question, I mean, this is all public health, and climate change.
Well, can I circle back a little bit on this idea of, the mental health and maybe employers' responsibilities? I think about, in our work, we're a special organization. We exist to help people with disabilities. We employ a lot of people with disabilities. And sometimes mental health issues come up. Well, weekly, it comes up all the time. And we're amateurs, to be honest. We've had a lot of experience, but we're not trained professionals, and we help people get through it. Just having a conversation about that today. What can businesses do, to help? Do they have a responsibility to help their employees, and how? What kind of resources can we help give people?
Well, I mean, again, does your company provide health insurance?
Basic, right? Just that level.
Yeah. I mean, is there mental health coverage in that health insurance package? You said weekly, daily. I would say that there's probably mental health issues on an hour by hour moment in any workspace. The reality is we all deal with it. We all deal with it in different ways, and some of us deal with it better than others. And then when you have complicating factors, let's say you have let's say that you maybe have a underlying mental health issue that is then made worse by either your environment, work environment, space where you live, stressors. Mm-hmm. We talk about adverse childhood experiences and their impact on people's physical and mental health. So employers need to be able to, provide resources, but also the awareness. And as I was sharing before with you, Steve, there's a stigma associated with having a mental health issue. We need to break down that stigma. If I have anxiety, if I have depression, if I have schizophrenia, I'm still a human being.
Absolutely.
And I may also have a medical condition, or I have a medical condition that's exacerbating my mental health issues. But again, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we have to treat people as if we would want to be treated by ourselves. And so I think, in my mind, if I look at what makes a good employer, it's one, and again, I just use that term generically,
sure.
It's one that provides an opportunity for people to be themselves, irrespective of some of the issues that they have, and provide a safe space, and don't exacerbate the situation by making it a bad workspace, and be open and be caring.
I remember a previous employer, I remember hearing a side conversation, someone like, this may be a decade ago, talking about needed a mental health day, and they just rake that person over the coals in the background. I was like, oh, that's the culture of the company.
Yeah.
They're not valuing that. And I see that changing over time.
Yeah.
Then that's positive, right?
It is. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Yesterday, for example, at Department of Health, where I work now, as I mentioned to you, there was a workshop, and there were probably about 200 plus people attending it. And it was about how you deal with the mental health issues of what has the pandemic done to you? What is the pandemic and its response still doing to you? We look at that kind of mental health response, and how are you coping? What are your coping mechanisms? What are your strategies? What are we able to provide as an organization for you to allow you to feel as if you have some control, as if you are able to sort of deal with some of the stressors? So again, I think that's, I would argue, part and parcel to a good workspace, and having people who care.
Right.
The employer, but also the colleagues. You want people who are checking, are you okay? Are you okay? Honestly, let's have a relationship. You want to be able to have those safe conversations. You want a safe space. You want to be yourself. And, again, a space where I have to put on a facade. I can't let people know that inside I am being torn apart. I am an emotional wreck. Oh, but if I express myself at work, oh, what are they going to think about me? And what's my boss going to think about me? That's not a space you want to be. The reality is, however, that many people find themselves in those spaces because they don't have a choice. They're making ends meet, and they don't have that safe space. They've got to be there to put food on the table. And so that's, again, I think one of the challenges we have, and that's why I go back to my definition of public health. It's a societal responsibility for us to create and nurture environments that allow people to have their health. And that's the broad space, that's the intimate workspace.
Yeah, it's everybody's responsibility, including employers.
Yep.
Be a part of that conversation.
Completely, yeah.
Well, I think about my own self, and especially that authenticity piece. That's something we talk about at work a lot. And I know for me, like, as I became more authentic at work, my level of happiness went up too. And I was surprised. I didn't know. I was a salesperson forever in the medical space.
Were you? Okay.
Yeah. So every piece of plastic, ventilators, everything, I have sold that. But when I came, to Skillskin, I started seeing a happy workforce, and I'm like, well, what's happening here?
neat.
I saw a lot of authentic people, and so I was like, I'm gonna try this. And I thought it was pretty weird. So I'm like, we'll see what happens. But as the more authentic I became, the happier I became. And so that really resonates with me. Think about if we can spread that, or, if there's some science behind that, I'd be really interested. But it's something that, I value at our workplace. And hopefully, our listeners, at your workplace, you can take a leap. Try to be as authentic as you can to see what happens. Yeah. Maybe we can create those spaces in our workplaces.
Shakespeare said, "To thine own self be true." And, that's something that's sort of something that I've tried to live by. I mean, I need to be true to myself. And when you're true to yourself and you're authentic and you're not ashamed, or you're not trying to put on a facade, you are who you are, then it's so much easier than, I've got to look this way, I've got to act this way. And some of us have a lot of warts and a lot of, we're not always pretty. But at the end of the day, we are who we are.
Yes, and have value.
And exactly, yeah. And again, I think that any workspace that truly values the person for who they are, not who they want them to be, and or who the person feels they need to be, then that's a workspace that you're going to have authenticity. And to be able to nurture that authenticity and to share that, that's an honor.
It's a world I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, as our time kind of wraps here, I'm wondering, do you have any parting thoughts for our listeners today?
Yeah, what do I say? I think I go back to what I started off our conversations with Steve. Do you care about the other people in your world? If you do, then you're a public health person. And, care about the people that you work with on a daily basis, the people that you interact with. Your point about authenticity, be yourself. Be there to support others. We're all in this together. And, it's this individual approach that makes it very, very challenging. But when we collectively work together, we're going to have a better outcome.
Love it. Appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
Just what a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.